Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you step by step on how to solve for the x-intercepts by completing the square. So there's a lot of steps in this process, and I want to go over the main ideas. In order to solve for any x-intercept, we always have to set y equal to 0. That's always the first step. So I'm going to put in a 0 on the left side. So I'm going to have 0 equals x squared minus 4x plus 2. Okay. Now remember, the goal is that we want to isolate the x squared term and the x term. In order to do that here, we have to subtract 2 from both sides. So I'm going to clearly show that. Okay, so on my next line, I have negative 2 equals x squared minus 4x. Now this is the part where we're finding the magic number that we want to add to both sides of the equation. There's a series of steps that we need to follow in order to get that magic number. The first step is we always have to take half of the middle term. Here, the middle term is negative 4. So half of negative 4 here would be negative 2. But don't forget the second step. The next step is we have to actually square that number in order to find the magic number. Okay. So in this case here, the magic number ends up being 4. This is the number that we have to add to both sides of the equation in order to complete the square. Okay, so on my next line here now, I'm going to negative 2 plus 4, here and here, negative 2 plus 4, that's 2. And on the right side, the 4 just kind of hangs out. So I have x squared minus 4x plus 4. Now, after we add the magic number, we want to make it something squared. So I'm going to rewrite it in parentheses as something squared. Remember, the whole goal of these problems is to get the 2x's, which we had originally right here, and we want to make it just 1x. Okay, so how do we know what goes inside right here in the parentheses? It always ends up being half of the middle number. So half of negative 4 here is just negative 2. And then at this point right here, we have to do something to both sides of the equation. Here I notice that there is a squared right there. So in order to cancel out a square, we have to do what's called taking the square root of both sides, okay? So taking the square root of both sides, I'm going to get plus or minus the square root of 2. Remember, when we take the square root of both sides, we have to write plus or minus. And the square root and the square cancel, and I just have x minus 2 on the right side. Last step, I'm trying to isolate the x, so I'm going to add 2 to both sides. And then my final answer here, I'm going to get 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 is equal to x. But remember, that's actually 2 solutions. My first solution is 2 plus the square root of 2, and then my second solution is 2 minus the square root of 2. I'm going to do one last example on number 10. It's going to be the exact same process and the same steps, okay? Again, what are we doing? We're trying to solve for the x-intercepts by completing the square. And in order to complete the square, we need to find the magic number, okay? So let's say for number 10, what are we doing here? Again, the directions are to solve for the x-intercept. So we always have to set y equal to 0. That's always the first step if we're going to solve for the x-intercepts. Setting y equal to 0, I get 0 equals x squared minus 8x minus 10. But remember, the goal is to isolate the x squared and the x term. In order to isolate the x squared and the x term, I need to add 10 to both sides. Okay, so adding 10 to both sides, I get 10 equals x squared minus 8x. So what I notice here are both the x squared term and the x term are now isolated, which means that I'm allowed to complete the square. Remember, for completing the square, I'm trying to make 2 x's go to 1x. That's pretty much the goal. In order to complete the square, I need to get the magic number. And in order to get the magic number, the first step is to always take half of the middle number that's in front of the x. So right here, okay? Half of negative 8 here is negative 4. Don't forget the second step. The second step is to always square that number, and that's how I get the magic number. And that's the number that I'm going to add to both sides. So right here, that's the magic number. I'm going to add that to both sides. So I'm going to do a plus 16 on the right I'm also going to do a plus 16 on the left. Okay. So 10 plus 16, that's 26. And then the 16 just hangs out on the right side because there's nothing else that it can add to, okay? After you add the magic number, then you have to rewrite the three terms as something squared, where the term inside the parentheses is always half the number in front of the x. Okay, next step here, I'm trying to solve for x. I see that I have a square right there. In order to delete a square or to cancel it out, I need to take the square root of both sides. So I'm going to take the square root of the left and the square root of the right. Remember, whenever you take the square root of both sides of an equation, you need to write plus or minus. So I have plus or minus the square root of 26 is equal to x minus 4. And then we are trying to solve for x. So in order to get the x alone, I need to add 4 to both sides, okay? Adding 4 to both sides, I get 4 plus or minus the square root of 26 is equal to x. Remember, the plus or minus means that we actually have two solutions. So then the two solutions here are going to be x equals 4 plus the square root of 26 and x equals 4 minus the square root of 26. And those would be your two final answers for the x-intercepts of the original quadratic. Okay, I hope this video helped. Again, this video, here's two clear examples, step by step. These problems went over how to solve for the x-intercepts by setting y equal to 0, okay? And after we set y equal to 0, we try to get the x squared and the x term alone. And then we added the magic number. And after we add the magic number, we are allowed to complete the square in order to solve for x. I hope this video helped, and I'll see you guys in the next video.